The millionaire's little daughter is bitten by a snake in the garden. Until the housekeeper. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The February sun mercilessly scorched the gardens of Maple Grove Estates, where three-story mansions rose among palm trees and stone walls. It was one of those stuffy afternoons typical of a summer in Texas, when the air feels sticky and even the wind brings more heat than relief. At number 47 on Azalea Lane, civil engineer Emily Johnson was finishing reviewing contracts in her air-conditioned office when she heard screams coming from the garden. "Mommy, Mommy, help!" The high-pitched voice of Lily, her 4-year-old daughter, cut through the air like a blade. Emily immediately dropped the papers on the glass table and ran toward the tempered glass doors leading to the backyard. Her Italian leather heels clicked against the travertine marble of the entryway, echoing through the 4,300-square-foot house like war drums. Outside, Lily was in the middle of the landscaped garden, among the blue hydrangeas that Emily had had imported from Oregon. The girl, with her curly brown hair tied in 2 pigtails, wore a pink dress with ruffles and was barefoot, something Emily always scolded her for, but the little one insisted on doing when playing in the garden. "Mom, a snake bit me. It hurts a lot," Lily whined, holding her right ankle with her small hands. Emily felt the world collapse. There, just a few feet from her daughter, a coral snake about 3 feet long was slowly slithering away toward the azalea bushes. The red, black, and white bands in perfect rings left no doubt it was one of the most venomous snakes in the United States. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Emily shouted, running toward her daughter without thinking of anything else. "Lily, don't move! Stay still!" The engineer picked the girl up, feeling her small legs trembling against her grey tailored blazer. Emily's heart raced so fast she could hear it in her own ears. Lily began to whimper softly, and Emily noticed her daughter's breathing was becoming faster and shallower. "Calm down, my love. Mommy is going to take you to the hospital right now," Emily murmured, trying to control the desperation in her own voice. "Where is my phone? Where is it?" It was then that she heard quick footsteps coming from the kitchen. Mrs. Thompson rushed through the back door, carrying a small clay pot in her hands. The 45-year-old woman, with her grey hair always tied in a low bun and a floral apron, had an expression of urgency that Emily had never seen before. "Mrs. Johnson, let me see the girl, quickly!" Mrs. Thompson spoke with authority, extending her arms. "No, Mrs. Thompson, I need to take her to the hospital immediately. Call the EMT," Emily shouted, clutching Lily against her chest. "Listen, ma'am, we don't have time. The coral's venom acts very quickly. Give me Lily now." "Mrs." Thompson's voice was firm, leaving no room for discussion. Emily hesitated for a second that felt like an eternity. She saw Lily growing paler in her arms, her breathing becoming more difficult. The maternal instinct screamed to run to the hospital, but something in Mrs. Thompson's certain tone made her stop. "How do you know this?" Emily asked, still holding on to Lily. "I'll explain later. Now give her to me." Against all her logical and rational instincts, Emily handed her daughter over to the cook. Mrs. Thompson knelt on the well-kept lawn, gently placed Lily on the ground, and opened the clay pot. A strong smell of crushed herbs wafted out, mixed into a green paste reminiscent of the interior of Texas. "What is this? What are you going to do with my daughter?" Emily asked in panic. "Trust me, Mrs. Johnson, please." Mrs. Thompson looked directly into her employer's eyes, and Emily saw an ancient wisdom there that she had never noticed before. With precise and careful movements, Mrs. Thompson applied the green paste to Lily's ankle, exactly where the 2 small bite marks were. The girl whimpered a bit, but soon stopped trembling. Within minutes, her breathing began to normalize. How did you do that?" Emily murmured, incredulous. "How did you know?" "I learned from my grandma back in rural Texas," Mrs. Thompson replied simply, continuing to care for Lily. Grandma Betty was a midwife and healer in our area. She taught me that some plants can neutralize poisons if you know how to use them. Emily fell silent, watching her daughter recover before her eyes. Lily, who minutes before had been trembling and struggling to breathe, was now sitting on the lawn, playing with a little flower she had picked. "Mom, can I keep playing?" Lily asked casually, as if nothing had happened. "No, absolutely not. We're going inside now," Emily replied, still in shock. Mrs. Thompson smiled gently as she tucked the clay pot into her apron. "She's fine, Mrs. Johnson, but it's good to keep her resting today. Give her plenty of water and watch her. If anything seems off, then you can take her to the hospital." As they walked back to the house, Emily looked at Mrs. Thompson with new eyes. The woman who had been taking care of her home and preparing meals for the family for 3 years had just saved her daughter's life with knowledge that Emily hadn't even known she possessed. "Mrs. Thompson, where did you learn this? I mean, how did you know exactly what to do?" Emily asked, still processing everything that had happened. "My grandma always said that nature has a remedy for everything, Mrs. Johnson. You just need to know where to look and how to use it," Mrs. Thompson replied, opening the kitchen door. "I'm going to prepare some tea for Lily to rest better." Emily stood in the doorway, watching Mrs. Thompson move around the kitchen with a newfound respect. Emily Johnson, a civil engineer, graduated from a prestigious university, owner of one of the largest construction companies in the metropolitan area of New York. A woman used to controlling every detail of her life with mathematical precision, realized she had just witnessed something that challenged everything she had always believed, and this was just the beginning of a journey that would completely change the lives of everyone in that house in Maple Grove Estates. Emily spent the entire night watching Lily sleep, sitting in the beige velvet armchair next to the toddler bed, with its Egyptian cotton sheets adorned with unicorns. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had witnessed. Every hour, she checked her daughter's breathing, measured her temperature with a digital thermometer, and looked for any signs that something might be wrong. "Mom, did you sleep?" Lily asked in the morning, rubbing her brown eyes and stretching as if it were just another normal day. "I didn't sleep well, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" Emily approached the bed, touching her daughter's forehead to check for fever. "I'm fine. Can I go downstairs for breakfast? I'm hungry." Lily jumped out of bed with an energy Emily hadn't seen in weeks. It was true. In recent months, Lily had been sick, with a runny nose, no appetite, and always complaining of stomach aches. Emily had taken her to 3 different pediatricians, had expensive tests done at private labs, but no doctor could explain why the little girl was constantly ill. In the kitchen, Mrs. Thompson was already preparing breakfast. The room, with its hardwood cabinets and black granite countertop, was filled with the aroma of fresh pancakes and brewed coffee. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson. How did the little one sleep?" Mrs. Thompson asked, stirring a pot on the imported gas stove. "She slept well, but Mrs. Thompson, I need to talk to you," Emily said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "About yesterday." "Of course, Mom. But first, let's get breakfast for Lily. I made her a special pancake." Emily watched Mrs. Thompson serve her daughter with a tenderness that went far beyond professionalism. The cook had cut the pancake into the shape of a star, added cheese, and drizzled honey on top. Next to the plate was a glass with a yellowish liquid. "What's that?" Emily asked, pointing to the glass. "It's fennel tea with chamomile. It will help with her digestion and calm her stomach after the scare yesterday," Mrs. Thompson explained naturally. "Mommy, can I have some?" "It smells good," Lily asked, already reaching for the glass. Emily hesitated. Her scientific training screamed against giving anything not prescribed by a doctor to her daughter. But at the same time, she couldn't deny that Lily looked visibly better after Mrs. Thompson's care. "You can have some, sweetheart, but just a little," Emily conceded. Lily drank the tea with delight, making satisfied sounds. Yummy! Can I play in the garden later? No, absolutely not, Emily replied immediately. You're staying inside today. We need to mow the lawn and call pest control. Mrs. Thompson gently intervened. You don't need to mow the lawn. Coral snakes don't usually stay in open areas. It probably came from the bushes at the back, near the fence. How do you know so much about snakes? Emily asked, crossing her arms. In the countryside, we learn from a young age. It's a matter of survival, Mrs. Thompson replied, washing the dishes in the sink. My grandmother always said there's no point in being afraid of nature. You have to understand it. After Lily finished her breakfast and went upstairs to brush her teeth, Emily finally had the chance to talk privately with Mrs. Thompson. Mrs. Thompson, I need to understand what happened yesterday. What you did. It doesn't make sense. At least it doesn't make sense to me, Emily began, sitting on the high stool at the kitchen counter. Mrs. Johnson, you are a very intelligent, educated woman, but there are things you don't learn in school, Mrs. Thompson said, drying her hands on her embroidered apron. My family has always worked with plants. My great-grandfather was a herbalist. My grandmother was a midwife and healer. I grew up watching her save lives with what the earth provided. But how did you know exactly what to do? How did you know what kind of poison it was? By the snake. A true coral snake has a specific way of biting, leaving small, close marks. And the venom acts quickly, causing the child to have difficulty breathing, Mrs. Thompson explained with the patience of someone teaching an important lesson. The paste I used contains herbs that neutralize toxins. I learned to make it when I was 12. Emily shook her head, trying to process this information with her logical mind. And you? Did you study this somewhere? Did you take any courses? Mrs. Thompson hesitated for a moment, nervously fiddling with the dish towel. I studied a few things, yes, but what I learned the most was from my grandmother. What kind of studies, Mrs. Thompson? Oh, Mrs. Johnson, that doesn't matter right now. What's important is that Lily is well, Mrs. Thompson deflected, returning to organize the cabinets. Emily sensed there was something Mrs. Thompson didn't want to share, but she decided not to press the issue at that moment. There were more practical matters to resolve. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to have to take Lily to the pediatrician today. I need to make sure she's really okay, Emily said. Of course, ma'am. It's always good to be sure. But can I suggest something? What? Let me make a tea for Lily to take with her. It will help strengthen her and prevent her from getting sick again, Mrs. Thompson proposed. What kind of tea? Boldo, fennel, and a little guaco. It's good for the stomach and for breathing. Emily fell silent for a moment. Her rational mind was battling against a growing intuition that Mrs. Thompson knew important things she didn't understand. All right, but I want to know more. Exactly what's in the tea and how you prepare it, Emily decided. Of course, ma'am, I can even teach you if you'd like. While Mrs. Thompson prepared the tea for Lily to take to the doctor, Emily observed every movement of the cook. The woman handled the herbs with surgical precision, measuring quantities without using any instruments, just relying on the experience accumulated over the years. Mrs. Thompson, where do you get these herbs? Emily asked. Some I grow back there, in the little corner near the fence. Others I buy at the farmer's market from Mrs. Johnson, who is also from Texas. You have a garden here at home? Emily asked, surprised. Just a small corner, ma'am. You never noticed because it's a bit hidden behind the tool shed. Emily realized that despite living in that house for 5 years and controlling every detail of her property, there were things happening right under her nose that she had never noticed. At that moment, her phone rang. It was Dr. Richard Anderson, Lily's pediatrician, returning the call she had made early that morning. Emily, you need to bring Lily to the hospital immediately. A coral snake bite is an extreme medical emergency. Why didn't you call me yesterday?" The doctor's voice was agitated. "Doctor, the situation has been resolved. Lily is fine," Emily replied, watching her daughter play happily in the living room. "That's impossible. Did you take her to any hospital? What antidote was administered?" Emily looked at Mrs. Thompson, who continued preparing the tea as if she weren't listening to the conversation. "Actually, doctor, it was a home remedy." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Home remedy?" Dr. Richard repeated the words with a tone that mixed disbelief and indignation. "Emily, are you telling me that you didn't take your daughter to the hospital after a coral snake bite and applied some kind of home remedy?" Emily felt her stomach tighten. Dr. Richard was one of the most renowned pediatricians in Texas, trained at a prestigious university with a specialization from Harvard. His private practice catered to the children of executives, entrepreneurs, and artists. He was not the type of man who understood treatments with herbs from the countryside. "Doctor, I know how this sounds, but Lily is perfectly fine. Better than she has been in months, actually," Emily tried to explain, walking to the office for more privacy. "Emily, this is serious negligence. Coral snakes have one of the deadliest venoms in the country. Without proper medical treatment, a child can die within hours." The doctor's voice was getting louder. "Who administered this so-called treatment? Some healer?" It was our housekeeper. She has knowledge of medicinal plants." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. "A housekeeper," Dr. Richard said slowly. "Emily, you allowed a housekeeper to treat your 4-year-old daughter with herbs after a venomous snake bite." When he put it that way, Emily felt like the most irresponsible mother in the world. Her training in engineering, her logical and methodical mind, screamed that the doctor was right. But her eyes saw Lily running around the house with a vitality she hadn't shown in months. "Dr. Richard, I understand your concern, but I need you to examine Lily today. She is fine, but I want to make sure medically." "Of course you will bring her, and I will have to write a complete report on this case. This could have legal consequences, Emily." The phone call ended with a bitter taste in her mouth. Emily returned to the kitchen, where she found Mrs. Thompson finishing straining the tea into a small thermos. "Mrs. Thompson, Lily's pediatrician wants to examine her today. He is concerned about what happened yesterday." Mrs. Thompson nodded, not seeming surprised. "It's normal, Mrs. Emily. Doctors don't know these treatments. For them, there's only hospital medicine. And you're not afraid that something went wrong? That Lily might have some after effects?" "No, Mom. I know how to recognize when the treatment is working. Lily has good color, normal breathing, and her appetite has returned. It's a sign that the venom has been neutralized." Mrs. Thompson capped the thermos and handed it to Emily. "Give her this tea to drink at the clinic. It will help maintain her body's balance." An hour later, Emily was at Dr. Richard's elegant clinic, with Lily playing happily in the waiting room, decorated with Italian designer furniture and saltwater aquariums. The girl was more lively and cheerful than Emily remembered seeing her in recent times. "Aunt Emily," Lily called, using the affectionate nickname she had invented for the clinic's receptionist. "Look at this pretty fish." Dr. Richard appeared at the office door, a 55-year-old man with grey hair styled with gel, a pristine white coat, and a serious expression that Emily knew well. "Emily, Lily, come in, please." The office was an antiseptic environment, with white walls, state-of-the-art medical equipment, and framed diplomas covering an entire wall. Dr. Richard gestured for Lily to sit on the examination table. "So, Lily, your mum told me you had an encounter with a snake yesterday," the doctor said, placing the stethoscope in his ears. "I did, but Aunt Thompson cured me with a green And paste that smelled just like my grandma's house, Lily replied cheerfully. Emily felt the doctor's penetrating gaze on her. Lily, can you show the doctor where the snake bit you? Lily lifted her right foot, showing her ankle. There were 2 small red marks, almost imperceptible, with no signs of swelling or inflammation. Dr. Richard examined the area with a magnifying glass, measured Lily's blood pressure, listened to her heart, checked her eyes with a flashlight, and performed a series of simple neurological tests. Emily, I need to talk to you privately, he said after finishing the exam. Lily, stay here and play with the toys. Mummy will be right back, Emily said, following the doctor to his desk. Dr. Richard sat down. Marina Johnson sat behind the solid mahogany table and crossed her fingers. Emily, from a medical standpoint, Lily is perfectly fine. There are no signs of poisoning. Her vital signs are normal, and surprisingly, she seems healthier than in her last appointments. That's good, right? Clinically, yes. But professionally, I have to warn you about the risks of what you did, the doctor continued. What happened yesterday was extreme luck. Folk remedies have no scientific basis. They haven't gone through controlled testing, and they can be extremely dangerous. But the treatment worked, Marina said softly. It apparently worked this time. But what about next time? What if your staff had gotten the dosage wrong? What if Lily were allergic to one of the herbs? Dr. Richards leaned forward. Emily, you are an intelligent, successful woman. You can't gamble your daughter's life on superstitions. Marina felt torn between 2 completely different worlds. On one side, modern medicine with all its scientific precision and advanced technology, represented by a renowned doctor she had trusted for years. On the other side, the ancestral knowledge of Mrs. Thompson, which had saved her daughter when she needed it most. Dr. Richards, I understand your concerns, but what if there is value in traditional knowledge that modern medicine does not yet fully understand? The doctor sighed deeply. Emily, I work with evidence, not assumptions. I can prescribe vitamins to strengthen Lily and provide nutritional guidance. But I need you to promise me that you won't expose your daughter to those risks again. What if she gets sick again? Lily has health issues that no test can identify. We will investigate further, conduct new tests, consult specialists if necessary. Marina looked at Lily, who was putting together a puzzle in the corner of the office, humming softly. The girl radiated an energy and joy that dramatically contrasted with the apathetic and sick child of the past months. Doctor, can I ask a question? Have you ever seen cases of children who improved with unconventional treatments? Dr. Richards hesitated for a moment. Emily, in medicine, we sometimes see spontaneous remissions that we cannot fully explain. But that doesn't mean we should rely on unscientific methods. But you can't deny that Lily is visibly better. I can't deny the clinical facts, but I also can't endorse practices that I consider dangerous, he replied firmly. Marina left the office with more questions than answers. Lily was officially healthy, but the tension between the scientific world she knew and the world of traditions that Mrs. Thompson represented was just beginning. In the car, Lily drank the tea that Mrs. Thompson had prepared without complaining about the taste. Mom, why was the doctor upset? He wasn't upset, my love, just concerned. Aunt Thompson doesn't need to worry. She knows things, Lily said with the simplicity of children. Marina drove back home in silence, realizing that the journey that had begun with a snake bite was turning into something much deeper and more complex than she had imagined. The following days brought a completely different routine to the house on Azalea Lane. Marina, who always controlled every aspect of family life with mathematical precision, found herself discreetly observing Mrs. Thompson carry out activities she had never noticed before. On Thursday morning, Marina decided to work from home to closely monitor Lily's recovery. Her home office was on the first floor, with a large window overlooking the backyard. From there, she noticed Mrs. Thompson walking through the garden with Lily, pointing at different plants and explaining something that made the girl laugh. Intrigued, Marina quietly descended and positioned herself behind the slightly open glass door of the living room, from where she could hear the conversation. "See, Lily, this little plant here is mint. Smell it," Mrs. Thompson said, picking a green leaf and crushing it between her fingers. Lily brought her nose closer and smiled. "It smells like the tea you make." "That's right. And you know what mint is good for? For when your tummy hurts or when your nose is stuffy," Mrs. Thompson patiently explained. "My grandma always said that nature has a remedy for everything. You just need to know where to look." "And this one, Aunt Thompson?" Lily pointed to a small plant with fuzzy leaves. "That's mallow. It's very good for when your throat is scratchy. But look, you can't just pick it without asking, okay? Some plants can be dangerous if we don't know how to use them properly." Marina watched, fascinated, as Mrs. Thompson turned a simple walk in the garden into a practical botany lesson. The cook knew each plant by name, understood their properties, and taught Lily to recognize them by smell, by the texture of the leaves, and even by their shape. "Aunt Thompson, how did you learn all this?" Lily asked, sitting on the grass to get a better look at a small purple plant. "From my grandma, Grandma Betty. She was a very wise woman back in Texas. When I was little like you, she would take me walking in the woods and teach me about every little plant, every root, every flower," Mrs. Thompson shared, her eyes shining with nostalgia. She used to say that plants are like people. Each has its personality, its usefulness, its story. "Is your grandma still alive?" Lily asked with childlike curiosity. "No, my dear. She passed away about 15 years ago. But everything she taught me is right here." Mrs. Thompson touched her chest over her heart. "And now I can teach you too." Marina felt a pang in her chest. There was something deeply touching in the way Mrs. Thompson spoke about her grandmother, a reverence and affection that showed how precious those teachings were to her. "Can I help you take care of the plants?" Lily asked excitedly. "Of course you can, but first let's have lunch, it's already time." When they entered the house, Marina pretended to be busy with her papers in the living room. She watched Mrs. Thompson prepare lunch with the Mrs. Johnson, dedicated the same attention to her plants. Each ingredient seemed to be chosen with purpose, every spice added in just the right measure. "Mrs. Thompson, lunch is ready," she announced, as she always did. At the table, Mrs. Johnson noticed that Lily had eaten her entire plate, something rare in recent months. The girl had always been picky about food, often leaving her meals half-finished and complaining of stomach aches. But since the snake bite, her appetite had returned completely. "Mrs. Thompson, this soup tastes different. What spices did you use?" Mrs. Johnson asked. "Oh, I added a little fresh basil and a leaf of boldo. It's good for digestion," Mrs. Thompson replied casually. "Boldo? In the food?" "Yes, ma'am. Just a small leaf. You can hardly taste it, but it helps the stomach work better. That's why Lily is eating so well." Mrs. Johnson realized that Mrs. Thompson had been subtly caring for Lily all along. It wasn't just the occasional herbal teas, it was a constant care, integrated into every meal, every drink, every activity. "Mrs. Thompson, how long have you been doing this? This special care for Lily?" Mrs. Thompson paused from serving dessert and looked at Mrs. Johnson. "Since I arrived here, Mrs. Johnson, the girl has always been sensitive, had tummy troubles, was often sick. I was trying to help in the way I knew. Why didn't you ever tell me? You never asked, ma'am, and, well, I knew you might not understand." After lunch, while Lily took her usual nap, Mrs. Johnson decided to have a more serious conversation with Mrs. Thompson. They sat on the back porch, where there was a view of a corner of the garden that Mrs. Johnson had never properly explored. "Mrs. Thompson, show me your garden," Mrs. Johnson requested. They walked to the back of the yard, behind the tool shed. There Mrs. Johnson discovered a small world that existed on her property without her knowledge. An organized bed of approximately 10 feet by 6, where dozens of different plants grew, all carefully cultivated and labeled. "My goodness, Mrs. Thompson, this is impressive," Mrs. Johnson said, observing the variety of herbs. "How long have you had this here?" "I started in the first month I came to work for you. I asked for permission to plant a few things, remember? You said I could use this corner." Mrs. Johnson vaguely remembered Mrs. Thompson asking to plant some herbs, but she had agreed without paying much attention, thinking it was just an ordinary garden. "And all these plants are medicinal?" "Most of them, yes. There's basil, mint, boldo, chamomile, lemongrass, fennel, mallow, guaco, comfrey." Mrs. Thompson pointed out each one. "Some I use in food to add flavor and help with digestion. Others I use to make teas when someone isn't feeling well." Mrs. Johnson knelt beside a plant she didn't recognize. "And this one? This is aloe vera. It's very good for skin wounds, burns, and itching. Its gel heals very quickly." "How do you know the right dosage? How do you know how much to use?" Mrs. Thompson smiled patiently. "My grandmother taught me to observe. Each person is different. Each problem needs a different amount. It's not like pharmacy medicine that has the same dose for everyone." "But isn't that dangerous? What if you get the dosage wrong?" "The plants I use are safe, Mrs. Johnson. They're not toxic. At worst, if you use too much, it might not work or cause mild discomfort. Very different from chemical medicines, which can have serious side effects." Mrs. Johnson fell silent, observing the care with which Mrs. Thompson treated each plant. There was something scientific about that approach, a meticulous and systematic observation that reminded her of the scientific method she had learned in college. "Mrs. Thompson, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, ma'am." "Have you always worked as a domestic worker?" Mrs. Thompson hesitated, nervously fiddling with a basil leaf. "Not always, no. But it has been quite a while." "What did you do before?" "Oh, I worked in other things. But that was a long time ago," Mrs. Thompson deflected, avoiding Mrs. Johnson's gaze. Mrs. Johnson realized she had touched on a delicate subject, but her curiosity about Mrs. Thompson's past only grew. There was something in the way the cook spoke about plants, in the precision of her knowledge, that suggested much more than traditional learning from her grandmother. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Mrs. Johnson pondered everything she had discovered. Her home had become a completely different place than she had imagined. Under her nose, a small laboratory of natural medicine was operating, run by a woman whose past held mysteries that she was just beginning to uncover. And for the first time in years, Lily was truly healthy and happy. The calm lasted exactly 2 weeks. On Friday morning, Mrs. Johnson was in her office reviewing projects from the construction company when her phone rang insistently. The name Edward X flashed on the screen, causing her stomach to tighten immediately. Edward only called when there was some issue related to Lily. "Hello, Edward," Mrs. Johnson answered cautiously. "Marina, I need to talk to you urgently. I'm coming over now." Her ex-husband's voice sounded tense and authoritative, in the tone she knew well from their married days. "Edward, I'm working. If it's about Lily, you can talk over the phone." "No, it's about neglect regarding our daughter. I'll be there in 20 minutes." The call ended abruptly. Mrs. Johnson felt a chill in her stomach. Edward Smith was a heart surgeon at St. Mary's Hospital, a doctor trained at Harvard with a postgraduate degree in Germany. A meticulous and inflexible 42-year-old man who had always believed that his medical training gave him absolute authority over health matters. The marriage had ended 2 years ago when Mrs. Johnson discovered that Edward was having an affair with a surgical resident. Since then, they had maintained a cordial relationship only for Lily's sake, with regular visits on alternating weekends. 25 minutes later, Edward parked his silver BMW 7 Series at the entrance of the house. Even on a workday, he wore a dark grey Hugo Boss suit, a silk tie, and impeccably polished Italian shoes. His black hair was perfectly styled, with gel, and his stern expression indicated trouble. "Where's Lily?" were his first words upon entering the house. "She's playing in her room. Edward, what's going on?" Emily led him to the living room with its white leather sofas and tempered glass coffee table. "What's going on is that I heard you subjected our daughter to alternative treatments after a serious medical emergency," Edward said, standing with his arms crossed. "Dr. Richard called me, worried about the situation." Emily sighed. She should have guessed that Dr. Richard would tell Edward. They were college classmates and belonged to the same golf club. "Edward, Lily is perfectly fine. Better than she has been in months, actually." "That's not the point, Emily. The point is that you allowed a domestic worker to administer untested substances to our 4-year-old daughter." Edward raised his voice. "Do you have any idea of the risk you put her in? Coral snakes have neurotoxic venom. A child can die in minutes." "But Lily didn't die, Edward. She was saved. By sheer luck. And now I hear that you continue giving her herbal teas and herbs. This is gross negligence." At that moment, Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing a yellow dress with a sunflower print. "Daddy!" she shouted, running down to hug him. Edward picked her up, his expression softening momentarily. "Hi, Princess. How are you?" "I'm great. Aunt Betty taught me about the plants in the garden." "Do you want to see?" Lily said excitedly. Edward's face hardened again. "Lily, go play in your room for a little while. Daddy and Mommy need to talk." "But I wanted to show you the plants." "Not now, sweetheart. Go upstairs." Lily obeyed, but Emily noticed the confusion on the girl's face. She didn't understand why her father was speaking so seriously. "Edward, let's talk calmly." Emily tried to mediate when they were alone. "Calmly. Emily, you are putting our daughter at risk with these medieval practices. Where is that woman? I want to talk to her now." "Betty is in the kitchen preparing lunch, and these are not medieval practices, Edward. They are traditional knowledge that—" "Traditional knowledge?" Edward interrupted sarcastically. "Emily, you are an engineer. You work with science, with proven methods. How can you believe in this quackery?" At that moment, Betty appeared at the living room door, wearing her usual floral apron. "Excuse me, Mrs. Johnson. Would you like to have lunch at home today?" Edward turned to her with a look of disdain that made Emily shrink. "You are the worker who administered home remedies to my daughter?" "I am, yes, sir," Betty replied with dignity, standing tall. "Do you have any medical training, any diploma, certificate, any kind of credential to treat children?" "I have the knowledge I learned from my family, sir." "Family knowledge is not scientific training." Edward raised his voice. "You could have killed my daughter with your ignorant practices." Emily saw Betty take a step back, but the woman maintained her composure. "Sir, with all due respect, Lily is well, better than she was before." "That was luck, sheer luck." Edward stepped closer to Betty in an intimidating manner. "And I want you to stop immediately with any kind of treatment you are giving her." "Edward!" Emily intervened. "Don't speak to Betty like that. Emily, this woman has no qualifications to decide what is best for our daughter." Betty took a deep breath before responding, with a calmness that impressed Emily. "Doctor, I understand your concern. Every parent wants to protect their child. But I can assure you that I would never do anything to harm Lily. Guarantee based on what? Your intuition? The wisdom of your herbalist grandmother? Edward spoke with disdain. Based on years of study and experience, Betty replied, and something in her tone made both Emily and Edward look at her more attentively. What kind of study? Edward asked, crossing his arms. Betty hesitated for a moment, looking at Emily before responding. I worked in medicinal plant research for a few years. Research where? At what institution? That was a long time ago, Doctor. It doesn't matter now. Of course it matters. If you have scientific training, why are you working as a domestic worker? The question hit Betty like a slap. Emily saw the pain pass through the cook's eyes, a vulnerability she rarely showed. Sometimes life doesn't go as planned, Doctor, Betty replied softly. Edward realized he had touched on something sensitive, but he showed no remorse. Regardless of your past, I don't want you treating my daughter with your home methods. Is that clear? Edward, you are being unfair, Emily protested. Unfair? Emily, I will be very clear. If you continue subjecting Lily to these unscientific treatments, I will file for custody. I have evidence of medical negligence that any judge would consider serious. The silence that followed was heavy. Emily felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. Edward was threatening to take Lily away from her because of Betty's care. You wouldn't do that, Emily said, but her voice trembled. Try me, Edward replied coldly. Lily is my daughter too, and I will not allow her to be used as a guinea pig for folk medicine experiments. Betty quietly retreated to the kitchen, but Emily knew she had heard everything. The atmosphere became tense, laden with unspoken threats and old resentments. Edward, Lily is healthy and happy for the first time in months. Betty's methods are working. Placebo effect, coincidence, spontaneous remission. There are scientific explanations for this that do not involve magic herbs, Edward countered. Emily, you are an intelligent woman. You can't really believe in this nonsense. And what if it's not nonsense? What if there is real value in this traditional knowledge? Then let it be scientifically tested, with proper protocols, control groups, publication in peer-reviewed journals. Until then, I don't want my daughter serving as an experiment. Edward looked at his watch. I have surgery in 2 hours. But I'm warning you, Emily, any sign that Lily is still receiving those treatments, and you'll see me in court. He left the house without saying goodbye to Lily, leaving Emily and Mrs. Thompson in a heavy silence, filled with tension and uncertainty. The war between two worlds, the scientific and the traditional, had officially begun, and Lily was at the center of the conflict. After Edward's stormy departure, Emily stood in the living room for several minutes, trying to process the magnitude of the threat she had received. Losing custody of Lily was her worst nightmare, and Edward knew it. He had used the most cruel weapon he possessed. Mom, why was Dad angry? Lily appeared on the stairs, slowly descending with her favorite doll in her arms. Emily knelt down to be at her daughter's level. Dad is worried about you, my love. Sometimes adults get nervous when they are concerned. But I'm fine. Look, my tummy doesn't hurt anymore. Lily twirled to demonstrate how good she felt. It was true. Lily looked visibly healthier and more vibrant than she had in the last 6 months. Her skin had a natural rosy hue, her eyes sparkled with energy, and she had gained weight after months of poor eating. Lily, go play upstairs for a bit. Mommy needs to talk to Aunt Betty. Emily found Mrs. Thompson in the kitchen, washing dishes with mechanical movements. It was obvious that the conversation with Edward had deeply shaken her. Betty, I'm sorry for the way my ex-husband spoke to you. It was disrespectful and unnecessary. You don't need to apologize, Mrs. Johnson. I know he was worried about Lily, but that doesn't justify his rudeness. Emily sat on the kitchen stool. Betty, I need to understand more about your past. Edward made a serious threat, and I need to know exactly who I'm dealing with. Mrs. Thompson dried her hands on her apron and turned to Emily. For a moment, she seemed to be fighting an internal battle. What do you want to know? You mentioned research with medicinal plants. Where did you work? What kind of research did you do? Mrs. Thompson sighed deeply. Mrs. Johnson, my story isn't simple, and there are parts of it I'd rather not remember. Betty, Edward is threatening to go to court to take Lily from me. If you have legitimate scientific training, that could help our case. Please tell me. Mrs. Thompson sat down across from Emily, her hard-working hands resting on the table. I graduated in biochemistry from the University of Texas in 1998. I was one of the top students. Emily felt her jaw drop. You're a trained biochemist? Yes. After graduation, I did my master's in pharmacognosy, the study of medications derived from plants. My thesis was about the active compounds of plants from the Texas semi-arid region with anti-inflammatory properties. My God, Betty, why didn't you ever tell me this? Because my academic career ended. Complicated. Mrs. Thompson looked at her hands. I worked for 8 years at the Natural Products Laboratory at the university. We studied traditional medicinal plants to develop new medications. Emily was in total shock. The woman who cooked in her home, whom she only saw as a dedicated housekeeper, was actually a trained scientist. What happened? Why did you leave the university? Mrs. Thompson got up and walked to the window overlooking her small herb garden. In 2006, our team was testing a compound derived from a plant that my grandmother used to treat inflammation. The results were promising, very promising. And then I discovered that the laboratory was falsifying data. The safety tests were being tampered with to expedite the approval of a drug that would be sold specifically to poor communities in rural areas. Emily felt a chill. What did you do? I reported it to the university administration. I presented evidence of the data manipulation, showing that the drug could cause serious side effects in children and the elderly. Mrs. Thompson sat back down, but her gaze was distant. I thought I was doing the right thing. And you weren't? I was. But I found out that the project was funded by a large, multinational pharmaceutical company, and some important people at the university were receiving financial benefits to expedite the process. Emily began to understand where the story was going. They tried to silence you. First, they tried to transfer me to another department. Then, they offered me money to reconsider my conclusions. When I refused, they started questioning my research methods, my credibility, even my mental sanity. That's absurd. It's what happens when you mess with powerful interests, Mrs. Johnson. I was forced to resign in 2007. My academic reputation was destroyed. No university or laboratory wanted to hire me. Emily fell silent, absorbing the magnitude of the injustice that Mrs. Thompson had suffered. And then I returned to Texas, tried to start over, but the scientific community is small. Everyone knew about the problematic researcher who had caused trouble at the university. I ended up working temporary jobs until a friend recommended me to work as a housekeeper in New York. Betty, that's unbelievable. You saved lives by exposing that scheme. I saved lives, yes. I later learned that my report prevented the drug from being distributed. How many children would have been harmed, I'll never know. Mrs. Thompson smiled sadly, but the price was high. Emily stood up and began to pace the kitchen, processing everything she had heard. Betty, do you realize this completely changes the situation? You're not a healer without training. You're a scientist specialized in medicinal plants. I was a scientist. Now I'm a cook who knows a few things about herbs. No, you're a scientist who was silenced for doing the right thing. Emily stopped in front of Mrs. Thompson. Where are your diplomas? Your publications. I have the diplomas stored in my room, some publications too, but Mrs. Johnson, that was almost 20 years ago. The scientific world has forgotten me. Maybe it's time to remind them who you are. Mrs. Thompson looked at Emily in surprise. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Edward doesn't. It's the only one who can play the game of scientific credibility. If he wants a fight, let's give him one, but with the right weapons. That afternoon, Emily went up with Betty to the small room of the staff member on the 3rd floor of the house. It was a simple but organized space with a twin bed, a small wardrobe, and a desk where Betty used to read before sleeping. From an old suitcase, Betty pulled out a worn leather folder. Inside, Emily found framed diplomas, course certificates, and a folder with scientific articles published in respected academic journals. Betty Thompson, Bachelor's in Biochemistry from the University of Texas, 1998. Master's in Pharmacognosy, 2001. Emily read the diplomas aloud. Publications in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology, Phytochemistry. There were over 15 scientific articles, all with Betty as the first author or co-author. Serious, rigorous research on medicinal plants. From the northeast of Brazil. Betty, this is an impressive resume. Why did you hide all this? Because I learned that knowledge without protection can be dangerous. I preferred to remain invisible. Emily looked at the woman in front of her with new eyes. Betty was not just a cook with traditional knowledge. She was a qualified scientist who had sacrificed her own career to protect innocent people. Betty, I want to ask you a question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, when you treated Lily for the snake bite, was it based solely on your grandmother's knowledge or also on your scientific training? Betty smiled for the first time since Edward's visit. Mrs. Johnson, my grandmother taught me that plants have power. My scientific training taught me exactly why they have power. The treatment I gave to Lily combined both types of knowledge. And are you absolutely sure it was safe and effective? Absolutely. I know exactly which chemical compounds neutralize the coral snake's venom, and I also know that the amounts I used were within safe parameters for a child of Lily's weight and age. Emily smiled. Edward had completely underestimated who he was dealing with, and now she had the necessary weapons to retaliate. The following Monday, Emily arrived at her construction company, Johnson Engineering, with a determination she hadn't felt in years. The 8-story glass and steel building in the Villa Olympia neighborhood housed 150 employees of one of the most respected construction companies in the metropolitan area of New York. Her office on the top floor had a panoramic view of the city and walls covered with awards for excellence in sustainable construction. Emily had built her company from the ground up after her parents' death, turning her pain into fuel for professional success. Lily, I need you to help me with an urgent research, Emily said to her executive assistant, an efficient 35-year-old woman who had worked with her for 5 years. Sure, Emily. What do you need? I want you to find everything you can about the academic career of a researcher named Betty Thompson. She worked at the University of Texas between 1998 and 2007 at the Natural Products Laboratory. I need published articles, conference presentations, anything that proves her scientific competence. Does this have to do with any company project? No, it's personal, but extremely important. While Lily worked on the research, Emily called Dr. Henry Matthews, her family law attorney. Henry had handled her divorce and was well aware of the complicated dynamics between her and Edward. Emily, I received your message. Is Edward really threatening to seek custody of Lily? Dr. Matthews asked as soon as he answered the phone. He is. And the accusation is medical negligence for allowing alternative treatments. That's delicate. Judges tend to be conservative when it comes to children's health. Do we have evidence that these treatments are safe? Henry, this is where it gets interesting. The person who treated Lily is not just any healer. She is a trained biochemist with a master's in pharmacognosy. The silence on the other end of the line indicated surprise. Explain this better to me. Emily told the whole story of Betty, her training, her academic career, the complaint that destroyed her reputation, and her forced exile from the scientific world. Emily, this completely changes the scenario, Dr. Matthews said after hearing everything. If we can prove this woman's scientific competence, Edward has no case at all. On the contrary, he may seem prejudiced. That's exactly what I think, but I need to build a solid dossier. I'll start working on that. I also want to talk to Betty in person. Would she be willing to testify if necessary? I'll ask, but she is a very reserved person with reasons to distrust the system. At 3 in the afternoon, Lily knocked on Emily's office door with a folder full of documents. Emily, you won't believe what I found, Lily said, sitting in the armchair in front of the desk. Betty Thompson was not just any researcher. She was considered a prodigy in the field of pharmacognosy. What do you mean? Look at these numbers. 15 articles published in international journals between 1999 and 2007. 3 awards for scientific excellence. An international patent for an anti-inflammatory compound derived from prickly pear. And she had a presentation at the International Congress on Natural Products in 2005 that was considered revolutionary. Emily picked up the printed documents and read with growing admiration. My God, she really was a rising star. And here's the interesting part, Lily continued, pointing to a newspaper article. In 2007, there's a small note in the university newspaper about methodological divergences that led to the removal of a researcher. They don't mention the name, but the date matches perfectly. So, they covered up the scandal. Exactly. But I found something even better. Lily smiled. Dr. Charles Anderson, who was her master's advisor, is still alive and retired. I got his contact. Emily felt a wave of excitement. Did you call him? I did, and he was very surprised to hear about Betty. He said she was one of the brightest minds he ever mentored, and that she always wondered what had happened to her after the incident at the university. Does he know about the complaint? He does, and he confirmed everything. He said that Betty did the right thing, but the price was too high. He would really like to talk to her again. Emily was silent for a few minutes, forming a plan in her mind. Edward wanted to play the game of scientific credibility. Very well. She was going to show him what true scientific credibility looked like. That night, Emily came home with renewed energy. She found Lily and Betty in the garden, where the girl was learning to identify medicinal plants. Mom, Aunt Betty taught me that this little plant here cures headaches, Lily ran to show a small chamomile seedling. That's great, my love. Lily, go wash your hands for dinner. I need to talk to Aunt Betty. When they were alone, Emily sat next to Betty on the small wooden bench in the garden. Betty, I spent the day researching your academic career. Betty seemed uncomfortable. Mrs. Johnson, I said that's in the past. It's not, Betty. You were a brilliant scientist, one of the best in your field. And I have a proposal for you. What kind of proposal? I want you to become the scientist you always were. Officially. Betty looked at her in confusion. I don't understand. Edward wants to attack me by saying that I expose Lily to unscientific treatments. I'm going to prove to him that the treatments you apply are the most scientific possible. How? Emily took a deep breath. I want you to document scientifically everything you do with Lily. I want detailed reports, biochemical explanations, bibliographic references. I want to turn your care into a rigorous scientific case study. Mrs. Johnson, it's been almost 20 years since I wrote a scientific paper, but you still know how to do it, and I will help you. I will hire research assistants, give access to scientific databases, laboratories for analysis if necessary. Betty was silent, processing the proposal. Why would you do this? Because Edward is trying to take Lily away from me using false scientific arguments. He thinks he can intimidate a simple housekeeper, but he can't intimidate a doctor in biochemistry with 15 published articles in international journals. I don't have a doctorate, Mrs. Johnson. Not yet, but I'm sure we can resolve that too. Betty looked at her plants, then at the house where Lily was playing, and finally at Emily. Are you serious? Completely. Betty, you were silenced for doing the right thing. It's time to regain your voice and to show the world that traditional knowledge and modern science can and should work together. And what if it doesn't work? What if they find out that I'm just a failed former scientist working as a housekeeper? Then we will prove that you were never a failure. We will prove that you were a pioneer. Betty was silent for a long time, watching Lily through the living room window. The girl was playing energetically, healthy and happy, in a way she hadn't shown in months. All right, Betty finally said. I'll try. We're not just going to try, Betty. We will succeed. That night, Emily called Dr. Matsuda with the news. The lawyer was excited about the strategy. Emily, this is brilliant. Edward is expecting to face a battle against alternative medicine. Instead, he will face a battle against cutting-edge science applied with traditional wisdom. Exactly. And Henry, I want you to prepare something else. What? If Edward insists on taking this to court, I want to file a counterclaim for defamation against Betty. She has been slandered as an ignorant healer when she is actually a trained scientist. You're declaring war, Emily. Edward declared war. I'm just choosing the right weapons to win. The battle for Lily's custody was just beginning, but now Emily had something she hadn't expected to have. A scientific secret weapon in the form of an extraordinary woman who had been underestimated for too long. Betty's transformation began the next morning. Emily had set up a temporary office in what had once been a guest room on the second floor of the house, equipped with a modern computer, printer, scanner, and access to the main scientific databases that her company already subscribed to for sustainable engineering projects. Betty, I want you to feel free to use this space whenever you need, Emily said, showing her the environment. And don't worry about household chores for now. I'll hire a temporary cleaner. Mrs. Johnson, you don't need to do all this. I can continue cooking and taking care of the house. No, you are no longer just my housekeeper. You are my scientific consultant specializing in herbal medicine, and scientific consultants don't wash dishes. Betty looked at the makeshift office with a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. It's been so long since I sat in front of a computer to write something scientific. It's like riding a bike. You never completely forget. That morning, while Lily was at school, Betty sat down for the first time in years in front of a blank Microsoft Word screen. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed the heading, Herbal Treatment Follow-Up Report, Patient SLJ, 4 years, female. Emily discreetly watched from the door as Betty worked. It was fascinating to see the gradual transformation in the woman's posture. As she wrote about the treatments she had applied to Lily, her language became more technical, more precise, more confident. Emily, Betty called after 2 hours of intense work, can I show you what I've written so far? Emily approached and read over Betty's shoulder. The document was impressive, a detailed scientific report documenting every step of Lily's treatment, from neutralizing the venom of the coral snake to subsequent nutritional follow-up. Betty, this is amazing. You're citing recent studies, explaining the biochemical mechanisms. This is high-level medicine. It's what I've always known how to do, Mrs. Johnson. I just needed to remember how to organize that knowledge on paper. The phone rang, interrupting. The concentration. It was Olivia from the construction company. Emily, I managed to schedule a video conference with Dr. Charles Anderson for this afternoon. He is very interested in speaking with Betty. Perfect. Betty, your former advisor wants to talk to you. Betty paled. Dr. Anderson, he still remembers me? Remembers. Betty, he said you were one of the brightest minds he ever advised. He's eager to know what happened to you. At 3 in the afternoon, Betty nervously sat in front of the computer for the video call. Emily stood by for moral support when Dr. Anderson's image appeared on the screen. A man about 75 years old, completely white hair, kind eyes behind glasses. Betty almost cried. Betty, my dear former student! Dr. Anderson smiled widely. How are you? It's been 15 years since I last heard from you. Professor, Betty struggled to find words. I'm so sorry for disappearing like that. Nonsense. You were too brave for the sake of your own career. I always knew you did the right thing in that scandal. You knew? Of course I knew. Betty, you saved lives with your whistleblowing. That adulterated medication would have caused irreparable harm if it had reached the market. Emily watched tears roll down Betty's face. She had carried guilt and shame for 15 years, unaware that her former mentor considered her a hero. Professor, I'm trying to get back into research, but I feel so rusty. Nonsense! A mind like yours doesn't rust. Tell me what you're doing now. Betty explained her work with Lily, the herbal treatment she had developed, and the scientific report she was producing. Dr. Anderson listened with growing attention. Betty, what you're doing is exactly the future of integrative medicine. Combining traditional knowledge with modern, scientific rigor, you are decades ahead of your time. Really? Absolutely. And you know what else? I have contacts at several universities that would be very interested in this type of research. Harvard has a new integrative medicine program that would love to have someone with your profile. Emily saw Betty's eyes light up for the first time in weeks. Professor, would it be possible? Could I resume my studies? Maybe pursue a doctorate? Betty, with your experience and previous publications, you could go straight into a doctorate without any issues. I can make a few calls if you'd like. The conversation lasted almost 2 hours. Dr. Anderson gave Betty contacts of current researchers, suggested scientific journals to submit future articles, and offered to be an academic reference whenever needed. When the call ended, Betty sat in silence, absorbing everything that had happened. How do you feel? Emily asked. Like I just woke up from a 15-year dream, Betty replied. Emily, thank you. If it weren't for you, I would never have had the courage to make that call. Betty, you have an extraordinary gift. It was unjust for it to be hidden for so long. That afternoon, energized by the conversation with her former mentor, Betty worked on the scientific report with a passion that Emily had never seen before. She researched recent studies, updated her bibliographic references, and expanded her analyses of the treatments applied to Lily. When Lily returned from school, she found a completely different version of Aunt Betty. The woman was radiant, confident, talking about plants with a technical precision that even impressed Emily. Aunt Betty, you're different today, Lily commented as they prepared chamomile tea together. Different how, my dear? More bright. Like a star. Betty laughed and hugged the girl. You know what it is, Lily. Today, I remembered who I really am. That night, Emily called Dr. Matsuda to update him on the progress. Henry, in one day, Betty produced a scientific report that would be accepted in any serious medical journal, and she reconnected with her former advisor from the University of Texas, who is willing to vouch for her competence. Emily, this is better than we expected. Edward has no way to attack scientific credentials of this quality. And there's more. Dr. Anderson suggested that Betty apply for a doctorate at Harvard in integrative medicine. Perfect. Imagine Edward's face when he finds out he's attacking not a quack, but a doctoral candidate from Harvard specializing in pharmacognosy. Emily smiled. The war is far from over, but now we have heavy artillery. That night, Emily found Betty still working in the makeshift office, surrounded by scientific books she had asked Emily to buy and printed articles from the internet. Betty, you need to rest. Mrs. Johnson, I haven't felt like this in 15 years, like I have a purpose again, like I can make a difference in the world again. You've always made a difference. You saved Lily, took care of my family, brought health and joy to this house. Yes, but now I can do more. I can prove that my grandmother's wisdom has a solid scientific basis. I can show that traditional knowledge is not superstition. It's science that hasn't been fully understood yet. Emily sat next to Betty and looked at the pages covered in chemical formulas, scientific names of plants, and bibliographic references. Betty, I have a confession to make. What? When I started this, it was just to beat Edward in court, but now I realize it's much bigger than that. You are going to revolutionize the way people think about traditional medicine. Betty smiled. Emily, you've given me back my identity, my professional dignity. I don't know how to thank you. Keep being who you are. Keep healing people, and keep proving that science and tradition can work together. That night, for the first time in 15 years, Betty slept dreaming of laboratories, research and scientific discoveries instead of just survival and invisibility. The metamorphosis had begun. 2 weeks later, the house on Azalea Lane had transformed into a true scientific research center. Emily had hired Julia Smith, a young doctoral student in pharmacology from Harvard, to assist Betty in producing more robust scientific documentation, what had started as a defensive strategy against Edward, but was becoming something much bigger. Betty, Sophia's test results have arrived, Julia announced, entering the makeshift office with a folder of documents, and they are astonishing. Emily had insisted that Sophia undergo a complete battery of medical tests to objectively document her improvement after Betty's treatments. The results showed not only that the girl was healthy, but that her health markers were better than they had ever been. What do the tests show exactly? Emily asked, joining the two women in the office. First of all, Sophia's vitamin D levels have increased by 40% in the last 15 days. Even without pharmaceutical supplementation, Julia explained, pointing to the graphs. This indicates that the mint and plantain teas that Betty prepared are significantly improving nutrient absorption. Betty nodded with satisfaction. Mint has compounds that optimize calcium and magnesium metabolism. My grandmother always used it for children who weren't growing properly. Second point, Julia continued, Sophia's inflammatory markers are 60% lower than in the last battery of tests 6 months ago. This explains why she has stopped getting sick constantly. And is this a result of Betty's treatments? Emily asked. Without a doubt, the plantain and chamomile tea she has been drinking contains specific flavonoids that modulate the immune response, Betty explained with growing technical confidence. Recent studies published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirm exactly these effects. Emily was impressed by how Betty now cited scientific literature with ease. It was as if a dormant part of her personality had fully awakened. And there's more, Julia added, smiling. The neurological tests show that Sophia has above-average reflexes and motor coordination for her age. Dr. Henry Thompson, the neurologist who conducted the tests, said he has never seen a child with such balanced neurological development. Is this also a result of the treatments? Emily asked. Partly, yes. The adaptogenic herbs that Betty uses, especially lemon balm and mint, have proven effects on the development of the central nervous system in children, Julia explained. There are studies in Korea and Japan that demonstrate exactly this. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Dr. Matsuda, the lawyer, with urgent news. Emily, Edward officially filed for custody of Sophia this morning. The hearing is scheduled for next Monday, he informed. Emily felt her stomach tighten. So soon? He has influence in the legal field, but we have a solid strategy. The scientific dossier that Betty prepared is impressive, and I managed to secure something even better. What? Dr. Richard Johnson, head of the Integrative Medicine Department at Harvard, has agreed to be an expert witness in our favor. He reviewed all of Betty's work and was impressed. Emily looked at Betty, who had paled at the mention of the hearing. Betty, are you willing to testify? You will have to face Edward face to face. Betty took a deep breath, looking at the scientific documents spread across the table, concrete evidence of her competence and the success of her treatments. I am willing. Sophia deserves me to fight for her, and she deserves the world to know the truth about what we are doing here. On Friday, 2 days before the hearing, something happened that would completely change the course of events. Emily received an unexpected call from an investigative journalist from the New York Times. Mrs. Johnson, this is Carla Johnson from the New York Times. I heard you have an employee who specializes in medicinal plants and would like to do a report on traditional medicine integrated with modern science. Emily hesitated. Publicity was not what they needed at the moment. How did you hear about this? Dr. Charles Anderson from the University of Texas gave me your contact. He said you are developing a revolutionary work, integrating ancestral knowledge with evidence-based medicine. Emily covered the phone and whispered to Betty, who was beside her. Would you be willing to give an interview for the New York Times? An interview? Betty seemed nervous. Betty, this could be our chance to show the whole world what you really are before the hearing on Monday. Betty looked out the window, where Sophia was playing in the garden among the medicinal plants, radiant with health and energy. Okay, I will do the interview. The journalist arrived on Saturday morning, accompanied by a photographer. Carla Johnson was a 45-year-old woman, experienced in science and health reporting, known for her serious and well-founded approach. Dr. Betty, it's a pleasure to meet you, Carla said, extending her hand. It was the first time someone had addressed Betty as doctor in 15 years. Emily saw her friend's eyes fill with contained tears. The interview lasted 3 hours. Betty told her story, the scientific training, the promising career, the courageous denunciation that destroyed her academic future, the years of exile working as a domestic worker, and the scientific rebirth she was experiencing. Dr. Betty, can you show us exactly how you treat a child using scientifically based medicinal plant methods? Carla asked. Betty took the journalist and the photographer to her herb garden. With Sophia by her side, she explained each plant, its active compounds, the appropriate dosages for different ages, and the biochemical mechanisms of action. This is mint, which contains menthol, a compound with proven antispasmodic properties. Betty explained as, the photographer captured everything. In children, I use a 2% concentration in infusion, which is safe and effective for digestive issues. And how do you know it's safe? Because I studied pharmacology and toxicology for 8 years at university. I know exactly what the safe limits are for each bioactive compound. Carla looked visibly impressed. Dr. Betty, are you aware that you may be starting a revolution in Brazilian medicine? I'm not starting anything, Betty replied modestly. I'm just scientifically documenting what my grandmother already knew 60 years ago. The report was published on Sunday, a day before the hearing. The headline took up half a page. An invisible scientist, how a biochemist transformed traditional medicine in New York. The article told the complete story of Betty, included photos of her in the garden explaining the plants to Lily, showcased her diplomas and scientific publications, and presented the results of the girls' medical exams. But the most shocking part of the report was a revelation that even Emily didn't know. Carla had investigated the 2007 scandal at the University of Texas and discovered that the medication Betty reported had indeed been withdrawn from the market later for causing severe side effects in children. Betty Thompson saved hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives with her courageous denunciation in 2007, Carla wrote. 15 years later, working only as a cook in a house in New York, she continues to save lives. This time, integrating science and tradition in a way that could revolutionize American medicine. At the end of the article, there was a statement from Dr. Richard Johnson of Harvard. The work that Dr. Betty is doing represents the future of integrative medicine. She is exactly the type of professional we need to bridge the gap between ancestral knowledge and modern science. On Sunday morning, Emily woke up to her phone ringing incessantly. Journalists were seeking interviews, researchers were interested in Betty's work, and even people were offering job opportunities for her. But the most important call came from an unexpected source, Dr. Edward Smith, Lily's own pediatrician. "Emily, I read the article in the New York Times," he said, with a tone very different from usual. "I didn't know your employee was... She's a trained scientist. Now you know." "Emily, I need to apologize, and I need to apologize to her as well. Perhaps I judged the situation too hastily." Emily smiled. The battle was not over yet, but the wind was changing direction. On Monday, when they entered the courtroom, it would no longer be a fight between modern medicine and traditional healing. It would be a discussion about different scientific approaches to healthcare, and Edward was not prepared for that kind of battle. Monday morning dawned cloudy in New York, but Emily woke up with crystal-clear determination. Today would be the day that defined not only the custody of Lily, but the future of everyone involved in that extraordinary story. At the Central Court of Olympic Village, the hearing room was busier than usual. The report from the New York Times had attracted media attention, and some journalists were waiting outside to follow the unfolding of the case. Emily arrived accompanied by Betty, who wore a navy blue blazer and carried a folder with all the scientific documents they had prepared in the past weeks. It was impressive to see the transformation. The woman who 3 weeks ago had been quietly cooking in the kitchen now walked through the courthouse halls with the confident posture of a respected scientist. "How do you feel?" Emily asked, as they waited in the anteroom. "Nervous but determined," Betty replied. "Lily deserves me to do this, and all the children who can benefit from this type of treatment deserve it too." Edward arrived promptly at 9 a.m., accompanied by his lawyer, Dr. Sergio Cavalcanti, known in legal circles for his aggressiveness. Edward wore a black Hugo Boss suit, a red tie, and an expression of supreme confidence. It was clear that he expected an easy victory against a simple domestic worker. What he did not expect was to find Dr. Richard Johnson, head of the Integrative Medicine Department at Harvard, animatedly discussing bioactive compounds from Brazilian cerrado plants with Betty. "Edward," Emily greeted her ex-husband coldly. "Emily," he replied, but his eyes were fixed on Betty and Dr. Johnson. "Who is that man?" "Dr. Richard Johnson from Harvard, our expert witness." Edward frowned. He had not expected Emily to bring in Harvard experts to defend her. Judge Patricia Andrade, a family law specialist, entered the room at exactly 9:30 a.m. A 52-year-old woman with grey hair tied in a bun, known for her impartiality and rigor in analyzing evidence. Good morning. This is case number 2024-15678, request for modification of in custody of minor LJ. You may begin, Dr. Cavalcanti. Edward's lawyer stood up theatrically. Your Honor, this is a clear case of severe maternal neglect. The defendant exposed her 4-year-old daughter to pseudoscientific treatments administered by a domestic worker with no medical training. Objection! Dr. Matsuda interrupted. The defense would like to clarify incorrect information regarding the qualifications of the mentioned professional. Sustained. Continue, Dr. Cavalcanti. As I was saying, Your Honor, after an extreme medical emergency, a coral snake bite, one of the most venomous snakes in America, the mother allowed a domestic worker to apply home remedies to the child instead of seeking specialized medical attention. Edward was called to testify first. His narrative was precise and convincing. He described the medical risks of a coral snake bite, cited international hospital protocols, and presented studies on the lethality of the venom. Dr. Smith, the judge asked, are you aware of the professional qualifications of the person who treated your daughter? I know she is a domestic worker who claims to have knowledge of medicinal plants learned from her grandmother. Is that information correct? Edward hesitated, realizing there was something he did not know. Based on what I was informed, yes. Dr. Matsuda stood up. Your Honor, we would like to call our first witness, Betty Thompson. Betty walked to the witness stand with firm steps. When she swore to tell the truth, her voice was clear and confident. Ms. Thompson, can you tell us about your professional training? Yes. I hold a degree in biochemistry from the University of Texas. Graduated in 1998 with academic distinction. I have a master's in pharmacognosy from the same university in 2001. I worked for 8 years as a researcher, specializing in natural products with medicinal properties. Emily saw Edward visibly pale at the prosecution table. And why is someone with your training working as a domestic worker? Betty took a deep breath and told her complete story. The promising career, the discovery of fraud in the laboratory, the courageous denunciation, the pay, the academic pursuit that destroyed her reputation, the 15 years of professional exile. Mrs. Thompson, when you treated the girl Lily after the coral snake bite, what type of knowledge did you rely on? I relied on a combination of traditional knowledge learned from my grandmother and rigorous scientific training in pharmacology and toxicology. I knew exactly which chemical compounds would neutralize the coral venom and in what dosages they would be safe for a 4-year-old child. Did you scientifically document this treatment? I documented everything. Betty opened her folder and pulled out a 50-page document. This is a detailed scientific report on all the treatments applied to Lily over the past months, including biochemical analysis of the compounds used, dosages, mechanisms of action, and bibliographic references from studies that prove their efficacy and safety. The judge flipped through the document with growing interest. It was obviously a high-level scientific work. Dr. Matsuda continued, and what were the objective results of these treatments? Lily showed a 60% improvement in inflammatory markers, a 40% increase in vitamin D levels, complete normalization of digestive function, and above-average neurological development for her age. All these results were confirmed by independent laboratory tests. Your Honor, Dr. Matsuda said, we would like to call our expert witness, Dr. Richard Johnson from Harvard. Dr. Johnson approached the witness stand. A 55-year-old man, a full professor at Harvard for 15 years, internationally recognized as an authority in integrative medicine. Dr. Johnson, have you reviewed Dr. Betty's scientific work? I have reviewed it thoroughly. It is one of the most impressive works of integration between traditional knowledge and modern science that I have ever seen. The technical precision, methodological rigor, and clinical results are exemplary. In your professional opinion, were the treatments applied safe and effective? Absolutely. More than that, they were superior to the conventional protocols that would have been used in the same situation. Dr. Betty demonstrated cutting-edge scientific knowledge applied with exceptional clinical wisdom. And what about her qualifications? Dr. Betty should be teaching at Harvard, not working as a domestic worker. In fact, we have already discussed it, and she will begin her doctorate in integrative medicine next semester under my supervision. Emily saw Edward shift uncomfortably in his seat. The narrative he had built was completely crumbling. Dr. Cavalcanti made one last attempt. Dr. Johnson, regardless of academic qualifications, wouldn't it have been more prudent to take the child to the hospital? In ideal conditions, yes. But considering that the specific antidote for coral is available in only a few hospitals in New York, and that time is crucial in these cases, the treatment applied by Dr. Betty likely saved the girl's life more effectively than the standard hospital protocol. The hearing lasted 4 hours. In addition to the testimonies, Lily's medical exams were presented, documents proving Betty's qualifications, and even a video testimony from Dr. Charles Anderson confirming the academic excellence of his former student. At 2 p.m., the judge withdrew to deliberate. 45 minutes later, she returned with her decision. After careful analysis of all the evidence presented, this court concludes that there was no maternal neglect. On the contrary, the minor received exceptionally high-quality scientific care from an exceptionally qualified professional. Emily felt her legs weaken with relief. Furthermore, the judge continued, considering the objective and significant improvement in the child's health under current care, I determined that the custody arrangement remains unchanged. The request for modification of custody is denied. Edward left the courtroom with his head down, accompanied by his lawyer. On the sidewalk, he approached Emily. "Emily, I'm sorry. I didn't know that Betty was," he began. "A brilliant scientist whom you humiliated and offended based on prejudices," Emily completed. "Yes, I'm sorry for that too." "Don't apologize to me, Edward. Apologize to her." Edward approached Betty, who was waiting discreetly near the entrance of the courthouse. "Dr. Betty, I want to apologize for the way I spoke to you. I was wrong about everything." Betty nodded with dignity. "Mr. Smith, you were protecting your daughter. It's natural. But next time, perhaps ask before judging." 3 months later, the house on Azalea Lane had transformed into what the media began to call a living laboratory of integrative medicine. Betty, now officially enrolled in her doctorate at Harvard, continued to live and work in Emily's home, but her role had evolved to scientific director of what was becoming an informal research center. Lily, radiant with health, had become a little expert in medicinal plants, helping Betty explain their properties to visiting researchers coming from all over the country to learn about the revolutionary work being developed there. "Mom," Lily said one Sunday morning while they watered the herb garden together, "Aunt Betty has always been a scientist, hasn't she?" "Always, my love. Sometimes we just forget who we really are." And now she remembered. Now she remembered. And we remember too. Emily looked at Betty, who was in the garden collecting plant samples for her doctoral research, and realized that the February afternoon when Lily was bitten by the snake had not only saved her daughter's life, it had saved all of their lives. If you like this, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you watched until here, comment, "I watched until here," and leave your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen. It's very exciting.